So you got your box, you unwrap it, and you enjoy the smell of plastic, and you start to assemble little pieces, and you start to paint perhaps, and hours and perhaps even days pass, and it's still not becoming the army you saw in the pictures. And yeah, that great feeling you had when you pressed that order button, it's starting to wear off. You realize that you've stepped in a Udetsen gap, and Games Workshop managed to trigger your inner goblin into buying something that is now rapidly getting closer to becoming your latest and greatest addition to your pile of shame. Tabletop Minions did an excellent video just days ago about how to restrain this inner goblin, but I want to pick up where he left off. What will you do now when you realize that the goblin has already won? As we're all different and have, well, different circumstances, I cannot tell you exactly what to do. I can tell you what I'm intending to do, and hopefully you can pick something up. It will not be, like paint it all in one weekend, because I don't have access to that kind of weekends. And no, it just doesn't sound very fun either. So I will tell you what I'm intending to do, which I believe is something, like totally reasonable for a person who, still has a proper life as well. And along the way, I will also tell you, or perhaps in the end, I will also tell you why I believe it will work. And also a bit about this goblin thing and how these two are related, I believe. So where to start? The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was right all along. First step is, don't panic. Raise your eyes and imagine the end goal. For me, that is me and a friend standing in a greenhouse, having a game of fantasy battles over a beer, chatting about whatever. The old world battles, old battles, whatever. That is my end goal. Then you need to break it down into what needs to be before that can happen. In my case, it will be applying the process of assembling, basing, and painting 98 miniatures, which is my total of the stuff that I've concluded I want. It's basically the Bretonnia box together with some Grail Knights and some pilgrims, battle pilgrims. But then you might want to, divide it into smaller parts to make it a bit more manageable, Here it also should be kind of obvious, like how the breakdown should be, You got a box of units, of an army. The obvious answer would be to break it down into each unit being their own thing. Now when you've seen the parts that make up your end goal, you put them in a logical order. And this might differ very much from person to person, Perhaps you've been away from this whole thing for like 10 years. Well, then you should probably start with the archers, if you feel a bit rusty on the painting side, because they will be standing in the back anyway. Or perhaps you want to do the general first, like while you feel inspired, and you might want to do the whole, see what the theme will be, like paint this person up, in whatever way and see what happens. I will save my general, that's one of the parts I know that I want to save my general for being, like halfway through the whole thing, so I get him as a sort of halfway reward. But this might differ, and as long as it's, a rough logical order, it's fine. You can change it later as well. The reason you should put them in this order is to have your path, clear. And then all you need to do is to look down and see what's the next logical step. Work on that one, finish it off, feel great about it, put it aside, look at your end goal, see if the order is still, correct, look down, pick the next, logical thing to do, finish it off, put it aside, feel great about this, finishing something off, and repeat the process. Suddenly, you will be in the end. Or at least halfway, where you get to paint the general. Here my plan probably deviates a bit from yours. You see, I did not get a box. my Goblin control system worked too well and I missed the pre-orders. Fear of missing out stabbed me in the back, and all I got was this Bretonnian booklet thing. So how do I feel about that? Well, quite frankly, I'm a bit annoyed. Mainly that it needs to be this sort of rat race to get a box of plastic toy soldiers. I mean, I was sitting here willing to spend my money, and I mean, I got to real life. I don't have time to sit around and wait for Games Workshop to play around with their Fear of Missing Out game. But in the end, I mean, it feels like the whole Fear of Missing Out thing was a sort of empty threat. I mean, in my case, it doesn't even alter my plans too much, actually. As you might be able to tell, it will be months before I can have a game in the greenhouse. But it's not only that. It is also connected to my Goblin control system, which is pretty much exactly what Uncle Adam prescribes, Make the Goblin explain exactly, like when and how things will be used, and also a sort of cooldown period. But I also added my own little sort of Goblin slaying, secret here, and that is a specific number. I can't have more than 100 items in my backlog. You see, Goblins are pretty sly. You make it explain these things, but they're very good at coming up with exceptions. But a specific number, it is kind of hard, to make an exception that today 122 is not more than 100. I will actually talk a bit more about it later, why these things actually work. But for now, just keep in mind that I'm really reluctant to break this number. So therefore I'm actually quite relieved that the box did not arrive, because my original plan was to actually put it in a corner and don't even look at it until I have cleared out the 22 miniatures needed. So that does not change if I got the box or not. And luckily, ironically enough, the first thing I had to do is actually to paint up these guys, which is a Ymborg City Guard warband, which is based on the Bretonnian men-at-arms. And not only are they the perfect test subjects for trying out, like my paint scheme for the whole army, but flipping through this book thing here, I also realized that they are actually my first old world unit, because these are pretty much a perfect fit when it comes to the borderland brigands. Sometimes when you just relax and keep an open mind, things tend to solve themselves, If the box has still not arrived when I've finished these 22 miniatures, it's not the end of the world. I mean, these are all miniatures I want to paint anyway. And, and even the army, the methodology is, to look at the next logical thing available. And if that's not part of the box, well, I'll just take the next one. I can do the general, I can do the trebuchet or some Grail Knights. It doesn't really matter, and yeah, I'm not doing the exiles because, some of you might already have noticed that this is not going to be a, standard Bretonnian army. It's going to be pretty exile. And I have no real plan of bringing a bombard, but it does seem like, a very fun thing to kit bash. So if there's still no box, I will just kit bash a bombard, or even two. I mean, I can just do whatever I want. Or just screw the whole Bretonnian thing. I can do whatever, The greenhouse game, it's not really dependent on me doing something exact, I'm not here for the Bretonnians as the Bretonnians. I'm here for having an army to paint and to field. As you now made it through the whole part where I tell you about my specific situation, you might be interested in hearing, why I believe that this actually would work. And if you're a software developer, you might recognize the methodology here. It is all like just stolen from the agile approach. And if you tell me that this can't be agile because I have no Scrum Master, well, then I think you should read the Agile Manifesto again. because, well, not getting into an argument here, but in my view, this is the core thing of the agile approach, is to find out where you are, where you want to go, and find the next chunk that you can actually finish off. Do that one, and in this case also, like, make sure that you feel good about it, like, this is, I accomplished something. Because in that way you can actually make that little inner goblin to work for you instead of against you. Now we get into the interesting part. This goblin, who is he and where does he come from? Uncle Adam mentioned that it's rooted in survival psychology, and I believe that is very much true. But he cut it short there, and well, I understand that. I suppose that he will stick to the subject and don't lose too many viewers on something that is not strictly gaming related. But looking at the pure statistics from a general video, I suppose that most viewers have already left by now, so I feel a bit free to talk about whatever I find interesting. Don't worry though, it will still be very brief. Let's jump straight into action. Your brain can be thought of as thinking in two different modes, one is fast and one is slow. And this is not something I just made up myself, or for that matter heard from some random dude on the internet. This is actually Daniel Kahneman got the Nobelish Prize in economics for it a few years ago. And he calls them System 1 and System 2, but as we already started calling one of them the Goblin, we might as well stick with that one and call the other one the Wizard. So the Goblin and the Wizard, he calls them System 1 and System 2. And the Goblin is in charge of, simple tasks such as 2 plus 4. You will know the answer before you even spell it out. Or, like mundane tasks like, where are my car keys? Or, warn you when something smells funny. The Wizard, on the other hand, is in charge of things when the Goblin can't solve them himself. Like, he has to call on the Wizard. If you encounter 13 times 26, unless you're some sort of math freak, you will have to, like, call the Wizard and, like, sort these things out, like start counting and whatever. Or for that matter, like, if you sit there with your little games book and you want to select a magical weapon suitable for a lady on a unicorn that has to cost no more than 40 points and fit with the whole army theme. Stuff like that. But as in all better game balances, there is a trade-off. The Wizard might be very bright, but he's not very efficient. The Goblin, on the other hand, is like ruthlessly efficient. And he's the reason why you can go through the day with a brain that only uses as much power as a light bulb. And calling it Goblin is actually sort of a downgrade. In my view, they're actually equally smart, just in different ways. The Goblin, however, takes a lot of shortcuts to keep up with this efficiency. And a lot of these deficiencies are known. And that is pretty much, that's not, like, Games Workshop exclusive, but it's often exploited in marketing. Because, admittedly, at Games Workshop are good at it. And it is the trick of putting the Goblin in control of purchases or decisions. Which is kind of natural, because the Goblin is actually a bit more cunning than you would think. And often informs the Wizard in sort of ways that he often encounters the information first and can spread the information to the Wizard and so on. So the Wizard can be sometimes fooled by the Goblin, so to say. People who know this, there's a lot more to say, but I will try to keep this brief. That's why it's very much simplified. But that is, the reason why Games Workshop does not put a big red banner on top, saying, have you thought through your purchases? Before you press the order button, make sure that you actually want and need all of these things. But I think this is also the core in Uncle Adam's advice. It is, trying to force the Wizard to wake up here, because you make the Goblin jump through all these loops. Explain it and explain it again and wait for it, because the Goblin, he does not like to wait. And he does not like to explain stuff, just, whatever, get it over with. And I think that's why these advice work. And it's also why I added the number. Because, as I stated earlier, even for the most cunning of goblins, it is very hard to say, you know, come up with an exception that today 122 is not more than 100. And that's the whole point here. You want the wizard to be in charge of your hobby supplies or hobby purchases, while Games Workshop wants the Goblin to be in charge. Therefore, you have these sort of simple little measures to at least try to bring the wizard into the sort of equation here. A short note on this specific number of 100, which has turned out to be a great number for me. It might be, you know, different in your case, but I believe it is a good number because it's large enough to actually, you know, contain even a full box like this with a bit of a margin, because you don't want to keep it too tight. You want to be a bit lenient there because you don't want to break it once, because if you break it once, it is very easy to break it again. And if you keep this, you know, like limit too tight, the tighter you keep it, the easier it is to actually break it. So you want to be a bit lenient, but on the other hand, you want to have an actual boundary, because if you say 10,000, it doesn't really matter. I know that I can paint 100 miniatures in 1 year, so even if I fill it to the brim, I know that it's reasonable to actually finish it off. So I think it's a good trade-off there. Admittedly, it's you know, still too much to do in one chunk, and hence the sort of agile approach where you break it down into smaller parts and do one at a time. So in the end, what I'm trying to convey is that you don't need to be boring in order to be effective. But I do believe you have to be effective to have fun. Because, you know, in the end, whatever you try to achieve, don't forget to enjoy your hobby.